the Belated Binge podcast.
Hi, and thanks for watching Belated Binge on YouTube. Here we post mostly unedited footage from segments of our podcast series where we re-binge some of the most iconic series in recent memory that I was incredibly late on. Follow along as we're rereading the Harry Potter series and join the discussion in the comments section. If you enjoy it, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to not miss an episode. And of course, if you want to hear the episode in full, you can listen to Belated Binge wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on social media, become a patron for early access and exclusive bonus content. Again, thanks for watching Belated Binge.
Scouting Report.
For this episode's Scouting Report, this is where we focus in and put the spotlight on one character. What did we learn about them? You know, what really stands out? What highlights in the chapter can we come up with for this one character? And in this opening chapter, shouldn't be a shock, Dumbledore is the character that we're going to focus on for this episode. In this chapter, it starts, with the Dursleys, and a lot of it is told from Vernon's perspective, but this is Dumbledore's chapter. This is the beginning of his master plan, all just forming and getting started right before our eyes, before we even realize that there is a master plan. And it's woven in, and we can kind of see little things in this chapter that all just allude to it. And upon a reread, it gives us kind of clarity on not only, some of the strings that he's pulling, but also, a lot about the kind of character that he is without us even realizing it. Of course, we know now because we know what happens. But when we first read it, didn't have a clue. All that was being laid out for us in this chapter. For starters, his grand plan beginning. From the text alone, we can gather that he sent Hagrid to look after Harry and told him where to bring him and, presumably when to meet there. He made the call to take Harry from the Wizarding World and bring him to his aunt and uncle's house in Little Whinging. He's the one that Professor McGonagall is seeking for answers to the rumors that she's been hearing, when did she hear these rumors? How does she know about all of the crazy stuff that's been happening all day? She's been a cat sitting outside the Dursleys all day. Did she just listen to the news through the window and that's how she knew about, owls and shooting stars and whatnot? That might be a little bit of a stretch, but anyways, she knows Dumbledore's the one calling the shots, and this is where he's going to be. So this is where she needs to be if she's going to get the answers that she's seeking. We also learn through her that Dumbledore is he's the guy, he's the dude, he's the top dog, he's the one to not to be effed with, if you will. He may not be the head wizard in charge of government, but he's definitely the head wizard, on the street. Even, I guess, if the street's cobbled. She tells us that Dumbledore is the only one that Voldemort ever feared. And if the person who's terrorized an entire secret society for 11 years, if that person is scared of you, you're a badass. We also learn about his belief that Voldemort is coming back, despite the fact that he won't tell Professor McGonagall this directly, which is more about his character that we're going to dive into in a little bit. But this belief is the foundation for his entire grand plan, his master plan that he's, putting into action with Harry. It's all based on this belief that Voldemort's going to come back. And at this point, what we didn't realize the first time we read this is that he's working with information that we don't have. There's, I'm sure, tons of it. But what we're going to focus on in this episode is 3 in particular pieces of information that Dumbledore knows at this moment that nobody else does. And he's not sharing with anybody else. One is the prophecy. The reason Voldemort went after Harry in the first place was due to a prophecy that Dumbledore was witness to. He knows the entirety of what was said, and he knows the piece that was overheard, so that Voldemort heard, because Snape sucks, and ran to relay it to him. This is the first of many, many times on this podcast, I think, that we're going to say Snape sucks. He also understands the power of prophecy. Although he does mention later in the books that he was never a big believer, or at least didn't practice the subject himself. Unlike other studious characters that we come to know and love, like Hermione, who writes it off as a form of magic that's not even worth considering because she, couldn't learn it in a textbook. We also hear Professor McGonagall herself, turn up her nose at divination multiple times with the way that she treats Trelawney at the school that they both teach at. Both of these witches are extremely book smart. And that's how we learn Dumbledore was. Very book smart. Perhaps the most book smart, ever. But he understands that while it may not be a field of magic that you can read about, in a book and learn how to do and hone and craft in that way, and thus, shouldn't be any less worth his attention. It's still a very valuable gift to be respected and, when appropriate, feared. We have a theory in the Theory Corner episode of Patreon where we believe that his respect for divination actually began, which, spoiler, we're theorizing that it has to do with his relationship with Gellert Grindelwald. If you'd like to dive into that theory, which we believe is a Belated Binge original, I haven't heard it brought up by anybody else, so I think, or at least when coming up with it and thinking it through, it was an original thought. If you want to dive into that, head over to Patreon and become a patron. This will give you access to additional content like our Theory Corner, where we're going to dive into some of our favorite theories and some of our own, like this one, as well as offer early access to podcast episodes and some more perks that we will announce later. We'll also be working with our patrons to determine what perks would be most interesting and valuable to them for their patronage. So that's the first. The prophecy is the first piece of information that Dumbledore has that we just simply don't, that goes into his thinking that Voldemort's still around somewhere and alive. The second thing is the curse on the Defense Against the Dark Arts position at Hogwarts. Only Dumbledore at this point in the story knows about that curse. He's been seeking out a new professor every year for that class since he turned it down to Voldemort, which is what the past, by this point, by Harry's time at Hogwarts, it was 40 years or something. So at this moment, maybe 30, 25, a whole bunch of years that he's been having to cycle through these Defense Against the Dark Arts teachers, and he's the only one that knows why, or at least is assuming why, based on that conversation that he had with Voldemort. While it's unlikely, of course, the one hole that can be poked in this thought that we had is that in the past 24 hours, he's had to hire a new professor for that position, but it's highly likely that he has either at least learned that he's going to have to fill it, or he will soon need to fill it before the school year starts. And that's just going to be affirmation to the theory that he's working on, or working under, I guess you could say, in that Voldemort is not actually dead. Because if Voldemort was dead, presumably the curse on that position would be lifted because Voldemort wouldn't be around anymore. And the fact that that curse is still in place, Dumbledore knows that Voldemort is not dead. He's just not around. And thus, knowing who Tom Riddle is and Voldemort is, he knows he's not going to stop trying to come back until he can get the power that he seeks. If that curse is still in place, Voldemort's still around, Dumbledore would know. What's interesting here to me, too, is that I wonder if Dumbledore is already suspecting Horcruxes, or at least one Horcrux. The text leads us to believe later in the story that he didn't expect Horcruxes until Harry brings him the diary at the end of book 2. But is that the moment that he removed all the Horcrux books from the school library? I doubt it. Slughorn tells Tom Riddle in that, memory scene that Dumbledore's particularly strict on the topic 50 years prior. So I think that when Dumbledore became headmaster is when he pulled the Horcrux books. And by the time, that Harry's parents were murdered, he's very well aware of how Horcruxes work. And if that's the case, in this moment, he has to at least be considering a Horcrux as a way that Voldemort was able to survive that rebounding killing curse. The third thing that we wanted to kind of focus on as information that Dumbledore has in this moment that the reader simply doesn't, is that Dumbledore knows about Lily's sacrifice. The specifics of the sacrifice. Not just that she and James died, but Harry didn't. He knows that she sacrificed herself in order to save her son. If he didn't know this, he couldn't have taken the steps needed to invoke the blood protection charm that would, protect Harry later in life. He wouldn't be bringing Harry to the Dursleys in this chapter now. But how is the question. Like, how does he know about the sacrifice? He wasn't there when she did it. We have a theory on this as well, and we're going to put that one in Theory Corner too. So this episode, you're actually getting 2 bonus theory pods over on Patreon, which, again, I think this one is another original theory to Belated Binge. So if you want to hear more about it and dive into that one, join us over on Patreon. But he knows all of these things that have happened in this moment that lead him to believe that Voldemort will try to come back, yet none of it is being shared with anybody else, particularly with Professor McGonagall in this moment, or Hagrid, which is laying the foundation for the Dumbledore character at the very beginning of this story. It completely solidifies, upon a reread, this is the Dumbledore story. We get it from Harry's perspective, but the moving pieces, the events that take place, the plot moving forward, this is the Dumbledore story. He's the one controlling all of it behind the scenes, all the way up through the 7th book when he's not even alive. It's his book series as much, or perhaps more even, than it is Harry's. I've heard some people complain about the Fantastic Beasts movie series. Why is Newt there? Why is Tina there? Why is Jacob there? What if this is just the Dumbledore Grindelwald story? Why do we have these other characters? Why is it being told, essentially through a protagonist in Newt? I would argue that that's what the Harry Potter series was too. It's ultimately the Dumbledore versus Voldemort story, with Harry being the protagonist and the way that Dumbledore was going to defeat Voldemort in the end. So what did we learn about his character? 2 primary traits are clear about his character in this initial chapter of the series. In this chapter, he didn't call on Hagrid to retrieve Harry by accident. He deliberately chose him to be the one to drop Harry off. This was part of the master plan. He's setting Hagrid up as a protector and as a friend for Harry from the very beginning, which is a very valuable chess piece. Think about it. Hagrid is developing a bond with Harry as a child. So when Harry comes back into the wizarding world, it'll be natural for Hagrid to take up that, protector and confidant role with Harry when he comes back. Also, he'll be happy to do it. Of all the things that you could ask a half giant to do in a war, taking care of a baby and bringing him to his aunt and uncle's house, it's not the most logical choice. Hagrid's not the most logical caregiver in this moment, but he is a heck of a good protector. And if somebody's gonna follow up for Lord Voldemort, which at this moment we don't know if they would or not a bad idea to have Hagrid the shield between the baby and the Dursleys. Just saying. The second thing that we learned about his character is his secrecy. We've established that he's got a lot of information already about Voldemort, about Harry, about the blood magic, the sacrifice, the protection. He's not sharing any of it, even with Professor McGonagall, or who we might call sometimes Prof. McG. She's been his companion for decades at this point. Depending on your timeline acceptance, in the canon in your mind, within whether it's within the 7 books, Prof. McG would have been working at Hogwarts with Dumbledore for over 20 years at this point. And if she could come here to Privet Drive to find him directly and ask him directly, confront him basically about the rumors, in the midst of a very important event in the wizarding world, their relationship had to be pretty close. Otherwise, would she be comfortable confronting him at all? Would he have just dismissed her right, as he got there? He let her be a part of this very intimate moment. The key beginning phase of his master plan, he let her be there. If she isn't already, she becomes his right-hand deputy head mistress at the school. They're close, yet he doesn't confide any of this to her. If you subscribe to the Fantastic Beasts canon, they would have been together for a lot longer. 70 some odd years at Hogwarts. And her cameo in the second movie suggested that she was already in his corner, ready to stand up for him against, the Ministry of Magic. They were basically sidekicks. She would have been there through confronting Grindelwald, through Tom Riddle at Hogwarts, the Chamber of Secrets the first time, the death of Moaning Myrtle, the birth of the Order of the Phoenix. Everything Prof. McG would have been there for, if you subscribe to the Fantastic Beasts timeline. It's okay if you don't. There's still plenty in the 7-book series. But he doesn't share any of this master plan with her. He simply says they're leaving him there on that doorstep to be kidnapped by anyone for his own good, so he doesn't grow up in the spotlight. These 2 core character traits ultimately define the Dumbledore character for the duration of the book series, which is a bit of foreshadow, but we get it all, laid for us like a perfect foundation in chapter 1 of Sorcerer's Stone.